Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Froglog. I have been hard at work the past few weeks, and I'm excited to share my progress. As you can tell from the title, I was working on enemy AI to make this game have more life. That isn't the only thing I got worked out, but I'll get into that later on into this video. Going back to my procedural areas, I had started brainstorming a way to spawn enemies. The main idea behind these areas was to have smaller enemies leading up to the final area where you battle a stronger enemy to get a bunch of loot. So my first plan of action was to calculate the farthest point from the player on the path, and that spawn point has a radius where no other enemy can spawn in. I then keep going backwards towards the players spawning enemies. It's a pretty simple but fairly effective solution for now. I'm currently using an asset pack for enemies that have 3 evolutions for each one. Going forward, I would like to make my own enemies with a variety of attacks and skills, but for now, I just spawn a random first or second stage enemy on the normal spawn points, and for the boss, it takes a random final stage enemy for you to fight. I was excited to see some movement in these areas, and got started on crafting a brain for these enemies. And before long, I had a very simple AI connected to one enemy that will chase you if you're within visibility and attack if you're within range. All these ranges and attacks can be adjusted really easily, and at this point, the attacks used are completely random. This AI had gone through numerous iterations in the past few weeks, and there will be many more to come. Stay tuned until the end of the video, where you can see a semi-decent playthrough of the area. At this point, it was pointed out to me that the little dragon looked a little too non-aggressive, so I went ahead and darkened the color and added angry eyebrows. I think the change worked quite well. Now I don't feel so bad when I beat him up. It's pretty apparent by now that the camera's system is pretty nauseating to handle and control when fighting enemies, so there needs to be a lot of tweaking and work done to make it smoother and feel nice. As well as the option to start fight without locking onto a target first, which isn't noticeable when watching, but definitely feels bad when you're trying out the game. You can also parry enemy attacks at certain frames when they attack, and they get knocked back, which helps you get a few hits in. At this point, you have no idea how much damage you've done to the enemy, or when they will be defeated. I know games like Monster Hunter do this, and as of right now, I'm not certain if I want to go this route or not. It's still very early on, and I will be experimenting on this idea in the future. For now though, I decided to add health bars to see the amount of damage I was doing. At this point, I started thinking about the grander scheme of the game, and I started thinking about how to scale the game based on the player or players. I had brainstormed about scaling everything based on the player's power level / gear score, meaning that the enemy health, damage, and size of the map would be determined when entering a new portal. There is a problem with this that was brought to my attention, which is that the game will be the exact same all the way through. When you just start out, you'll be doing the same % of health to the enemy as you would in the late game. So, that at a base level does not work very well. I do have a potential solution that would help replayability, and that could be random weather systems when entering a portal. Say you enter a portal and it's raining. Potential fire enemies would be weakened, and you, as a frog, would gain a speed boost. But enemies that are plant-like grow larger and stronger due to the rain. Each potential weather system would have their own buffs and debuffs. I began to implement scaling on enemies, and while I was working on that, I decided to go back to the item system that I had in place. And if you don't remember from the previous Froglog, I shortcutted the prestige system by just creating a new object in Unity that stored the base changes of the item. So to put this into perspective, I would need 6 item objects for each prestige, going from no prestige to prestige 5. Then on top of that, for each rarity of item, so just one weapon would need 36 different item objects stored in the project files. This would add up real quick, with a lot of weapons and gear. I took it upon myself for the next few days to rework this entire system to get the item object count from 36 to 1. It took a little longer than a few days, but I got it to work, and I was beyond relieved. This will save days of work adding new items, and also make scaling weapons based on rarity and levels so much easier. The whole scaling system isn't properly implemented yet, but there is a starting point where the enemies have more health depending on the power level, which at this point I only have a weapon to use. I should also take this time to talk about the weapons of the game. I am torn on whether or not to let the player craft weapons based on item drops from enemies, or have weapons be part of loot drops. If the player will be able to obtain weapons through crafting, then it does lean towards the player choosing the best weapon they think is for them. This also means a crafted weapon would be a common Prestige 0 weapon, but if the player prestiges the weapon, it then becomes an uncommon Prestige 1, so on and so forth. I'll create a community post outlining these two changes and see what people would like to see the most. Now that I worked that out, I finally got around to creating the final boss of the region, and well, here's a final look of how the world looks now. I did a few tweaks here and there, like converting the ground from a mesh to a terrain, which makes the blending of textures look so much nicer, and will also lead to cool things that I could add, like tessellation. I also made it so that the trees have less a chance of spawning so close to the pathway, because the leaves would just shroud the pathway, leaving you and everything around it in shadows. That's all I have for this frog log, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I had, adding all these new features that bring the game closer and closer to being playable. See you all in the next one.